So, today, we're going to dive into a story that, honestly, it starts right in the heart of a family, but ends up in the highest court in India. It's about a mother's gift, a son's promise, and a legal battle that really puts a law designed to protect our elders to the ultimate test. Okay, let's get into it. At its core, this whole case boils down to a really personal and, let's face it, powerful question. I mean, think about it. A parent transfers their property, probably their life savings, to their child, with the simple trust that they'll be looked after. But what happens when that trust is completely shattered? All right, so here's the quick timeline of what went down. Urmila Dixit had owned her property for over 50 years. Then, in 2019, she gifts it to her son. But just a little over a year later, things have gone so wrong that she's in court trying to get it back. And that journey, well, it took years and ended with a landmark decision from the Supreme Court. Okay, so let's rewind and start right at the beginning with the actual agreement. Because this wasn't just some casual handshake deal. Nope, this was a formal transfer of property. And as we're about to see, that promise of care was also put down in writing. Now, how they structured this deal is absolutely key to the whole story. You see, it wasn't one document. It was two, signed together. First, a gift deed, which is the legal paper that transfers the property, and second, a promissory note to spell out the son's promise. This separation, this becomes the entire flashpoint for the legal fight that followed. So let's look at the exact words they used, because it's crucial. The gift deed itself had this kind of subtle phrase about the son maintaining his mother. But the promissory note, oh, it was crystal clear. It promised lifelong care and, this is the real kicker, it laid out a consequence. If the son didn't hold up his end of the bargain, his mother had the right to take the gift back. So you put the two documents together, and the story they tell is pretty hard to misunderstand. But when Urmila Dixit felt that promise was broken, well, she had to fight. And her journey through the justice system was, to put it mildly, a total roller coaster. Just look at this. It's wild. Urmila wins at the first level, a special tribunal for senior citizens. Her son appeals, and she wins again. He appeals a second time to a single judge in the high court, and believe it or not, she wins a third time. You'd think it's over, right? Wrong. In the final appeal within that same high court, bam, the tables completely turn. After 3 solid victories, the decision is reversed. So you're probably asking, why the sudden flip? Well, it all came down to a super strict, very technical reading of the law. The High Court's division bench basically said, look, that promise and the take-back clause, they were in the promissory note, not spelled out word for word inside the gift deed. So, tough luck, it doesn't count. This decision effectively pretended the two documents had nothing to do with each other, totally ignoring the reality of how they were signed. And that right there, that sets up the classic legal showdown that landed this case in the Supreme Court. Was it the court's job to just read the literal words on the page? Or was it their job to understand why the law was created in the first place and make sure it works? Let's just break this down. On one side, you've got the letter of the law. It's super rigid, black and white. It says if a condition isn't written exactly where I expect to see it, it basically doesn't exist. That was the High Court's take. But on the other side, you've got the spirit of the law. This approach asks a much deeper question. Why does this law even exist? What problem was Parliament trying to solve when they wrote it? And this brings us to a really important legal idea called beneficial legislation. You see, the Senior Citizens Act isn't just any old law. It was specifically created to protect a vulnerable group. Its entire reason for being is to give elderly folks a simple, quick way to get help when they're being neglected. And laws like this, the Supreme Court has said time and again, you just can't read them in the same rigid way as, say, a tax code. And look, this isn't some brand new idea the court just came up with. They have a really clear philosophy on this. They've said in other cases that it's their job to figure out the intention behind a law and then interpret it so that it actually works. They've been very clear. A strict, literal reading that completely defeats the purpose of a law is something to be avoided. So, with these two totally different ways of looking at the law on the table, the big question is, which path did the Supreme Court take in Urmila Dixit's case? The answer? They sided with the mother, period. The Supreme Court slammed the door on the High Court's technical argument and brought back the original rulings that had been in her favor from the very beginning. And what did that mean practically? It meant the gift deed from 2019 was canceled, null and void. Legally, it was like it never happened. After a long, hard fight, Urmila Dixit was getting her home back. So how did they get there? Well, their logic was crystal clear, and it followed everything we've been talking about. First, they said the Senior Citizens Act is what's called beneficial legislation, and you have to read it generously to make sure it actually protects people. Second, they pointed out that the High Court's super strict reading would basically make the law useless. Third, they looked at the reality of the situation. The gift deed and the promissory note were obviously part of the same deal, and together they set up a clear condition of care. The son's failure to provide that care was exactly the kind of thing this law was written for.
And the court didn't just stop with the verdict. They made sure it had real teeth. To make sure this wasn't just a paper victory that could get tied up in delays for years, they set a hard deadline. No wiggle room. The property had to be returned to Urmila Dixit by February 28, 2025. A powerful move that showed just how final and serious their judgment was.
Okay, so obviously this is a huge deal for the Dixit family, but why should the rest of us care? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, it's because this ruling sends a massive signal. It reinforces and seriously strengthens the legal safety net for every single senior citizen in the country who might find themselves in a similarly awful position.
This chart really breaks down the before and after for us. Before this ruling, you had this legal loophole. A child could get a property and then argue that the promise of care, because it was in a separate document, wasn't technically a condition. But now, after this ruling, courts are ordered to look at the whole picture, the real intention of the deal. The spirit of the law now officially trumps the letter of the law.
At the end of the day, the Supreme Court really just brought everyone back to square one. Back to the whole point of the law in the first place. The system was designed to be simple, cheap, and fast for seniors, not a confusing maze of legal technologies. This ruling makes sure it stays that way.
And this really leaves us with a huge question to think about. This case wasn't just about legal jargon, it was about defining a crucial balance. On one hand, you have the rights of property owners. On the other, you have society's duty, both moral and legal, to make sure our elders are cared for with dignity. And with this judgment, the Supreme Court has decisively tilted that balance in favor of protecting the vulnerable.